Welcome to the Monday Monologue. And I know it's been a couple of weeks where I haven't posted any videos, and yeah, that's kind of going to be the way this is. Unfortunately, to make this work, there's a lot of behind the scenes research and development that goes on working with other vendors, etc., trying to get all the stuff together to do some of these projects. And well, I know a lot of you guys, enjoy watching my videos. It is time consuming, and I have to try to balance, spending time recording and editing videos, which, believe it or not, takes several hours to do each one. And so, yeah, I kind of feel like that when I have a video day, that whole day is just shot. And so I've been running around trying to get a bunch of new transformers designed to be used on some of my products. And when I do this, like Thermionic Labs has a whole set of iron that they developed and sell as a kit to build my KT120 monoblocks, which a bunch of people have done. And previous to them working up these transformers, there were not the parts available to build that amplifier. And so the same thing's going to be true of like my budget 300B amp or my basic 300B amp. I know some people don't like it being called budget because then they think it's some, cheap piece of junk. But yeah, compared to some of my other projects in using 300Bs, it is a lower price point one, and to meet that price point has not been easy. One of the things I had to work with is something I know nothing about, still know very little about, is CAD design. And it's interesting, even when I talk to my friends that do that, they're all like, oh yeah, pop over and we'll, I kind of show you how to work with SketchUp and some of these easier to use programs and stuff, but then 3 weeks go by and they're still too busy to do a tutorial. And so, I've looked a little bit online and I'm discovering that there's these proprietary file formats that only work with like SolidWorks and these really expensive packages that were designed for huge projects, not for just a simple little thing. And so there's this steep learning curve. And like the FreeCAD, when I went to, upload some files that people had sent me, the program was like, oh yeah, we don't support that natively. You have to use this other converter, and they sometimes work, sometimes don't. And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to get away from like Microsoft Word and use like some freeware word processor, and you open up a Microsoft file in it, it's almost always just boop. It's fonts are weird, the indents are different, stuff's all over the place, and every software wants to use its own file format to save the program in or to save the, design in. And then I went to this shop locally, which I thought was going to be a pretty simple thing. And the viewer who made this step file that worked fine at Send Cut Send, when I took it to him, he's like, I need a DWG or something else. And so then when I had that file created, then when I tried to open it, it was like all weird, where I could see the other one in this other viewing program. And so, I honestly can't spend thousands of dollars buying software, and I can't spend months of my life learning CAD programming, but I'm probably going to have to at least somewhat learn how to do this, or just keep fabbing this stuff up by hand, which isn't a viable option for hitting a price point that I'd like to hit with this 300B amp. And so, and the Send Cut Send chassis was okay, but it just not really up to my standards. The corners had a big open hole in them, and even when they folded the sides in, didn't quite touch, and I was going to have to, buy a spot welder and start doing that kind of work here. And yeah, I got to figure that out. And so that's been a very time-consuming thing. And my local powder coater has been great. So that's not an issue, getting the stuff powder coated. So then started looking at the transformers. And here was the one I got for the 2A3. And while this is a pretty big transformer, you can see, on this side it's fairly compact this way, and it's not super crazy heavy. So I bought one of Hammond's 300B transformers, and this beast is a monster and weighs like 11 pounds. It's got way more milliamp reserve than you would ever need for a 300B amp. It's got 288 milliamps. 200's big. And so it's like 30% over what's needed. And then it's got like a 6 amp, 6.3 volt to drive like two 6S and 7s, which are going to use maybe a little over an amp. And so it just doesn't make sense to use this monster. And honestly, this 2A3 amp could hopefully be sized down to something more appropriate for a 2A3. So enter Matt at Musical Power Supplies. I talked to him. He made up this 300B power transformer that is this size. I mean, look at the difference in those two. This has 200 milliamps on the high voltage rail. It's got two 7 volt, 2 amp rails for the 300B heaters, where this is a 5 volt. So with the 7 volt rails, I can use a low dropout regulator and have regulated DC heaters, which are quieter and voltage is spot on at 5 volts, which 300B tubes really like to see. It's got a 2 amp, 6.3 volt rail. It's got all the voltages in one transformer at a much better price point than this big monster that is just total overkill. So then we got to talking about monoblock amps. And one of the things about monoblocks that just kind of bothers me is that you're duplicating the power transformer and the choke and all this stuff. It's doubling the expense. And then you've got these transformers that are just way overkill. And it's hard to get the voltages in the right spot because there's so much excess capacity that it makes all the voltages higher than they should be. So you're fighting that problem. And so he made me up a pair of these, which are monoblock size 300B transformers that have one 300B filament, one rail for the 6.3 for the the single SSN7, and it's a blower like a 1.2 amp. It's plenty. Also has the same high voltage, but it's 100 milliamps, which is plenty for a single 300B tube. So, and they're probably 2/3 of the price of this big guy, and so that's going to lower the cost of being able to do monoblocks. Plus, it just makes sense to use a smaller transformer. And then, but Hammond doesn't make those choices. It's like you get this big fat guy or that's it. He also made me up a couple of 100 milliamp chokes to go with this power transformer. And one of the things that I've learned from experimenting is earlier I was using 2 chokes in the power supply. And while it worked well, I feel like it's really unnecessary, and I'm not even sure it's as good as using a cap, choke, cap, then resistor cap, instead of using a cap, choke, cap power supply. I know that's a mouthful. Anyway, I think having a resistor cap filter after the choke helps filter out some of the weirdness that can happen with the inductance of the choke. And so while a choke does filter the AC really well for the most part, there are certain frequencies that it doesn't, and then the resistor cap catches those. And so I think going forward, I'm going to be building my amps And I did the 2A3 like this. I did my EL34 amps the same way, using one top-mounted choke and then having a 50 ohm resistor for the second stage of filtering. There's a lot of amps that don't even use the second stage of filtering, so we're already going overkill. And on the higher end versions of the 300B, we're probably going to use 2 parallel stages of filtering for the output tubes. So we do have like the dual rail power supply still, but instead of using a second choke or a pair of second chokes, we're going to be using a pair of 50 ohm 5 watt resistors in the power supply to split the rail up, and then have caps for each of those. And yeah, just learning lots of stuff still. One of the things I've always done is used a split rail supply to the driver tubes. A lot of designs have the driver tubes sharing a resistor cap that decouples it from the output tubes. I feel like each driver tube should have its own, and that's another thing that I've learned really is a good thing to do, or a good practice. So I'm going to continue doing that. But anyway, trying to work with vendors and get all these transformers made. And of course, once I get these amps built and tested and make sure all this iron works like I think it's going to, oh, and he made me up some. These are the output transformers for the low or base model 300B. And these are 20 watt, 3.5K with 8 ohm tap. And I think they're going to work really well in this amp, with this transformer. These monos are going to get used with either ISO Tango or those big Thermionic Lab transformers, and I still got to test that. So that's coming up, is a test between those two transformers. And then one of the things I've been experimenting with, this company, Advanced Silver Technology, and I'll put a link below, sent me a couple of different samples of their silver wire. And one of them is thicker, around 18 gauge, that's fine for, speaker connections, power to the plates of, output tubes and all that kind of stuff. And then they sent another package of some more like 22 gauge wire that's perfect for using in the signal path, like for the grids of tubes and that sort of thing. And so I've been experimenting with some silver wire, and so far I like the results that I'm getting from it. Not sure it's necessary in every application, but once you start getting into using like the ISO Tango iron and that sort of thing, it probably makes sense to use some of this. The other thing though was the shielded wire that I was using on the input signal from the RCA jack to the volume controller, just the RCA jack to the grid, was just standard copper shielded wire. And I found a guy on eBay that's selling this silver plated braided shield, really super nice, Teflon insulation wire. And so I bought a couple of spools of this stuff to use on the nicer amps, because if we're going to be putting silver in other parts of the amp and the wiring, it makes sense to use it on the input signal as well. Yeah, and just trying to catch up on my parts inventory, which you can see some of it behind here, making sure that I've got resistors and all the values I need, and I have the 5-volt low dropout regulators I need to do my 300B amps with, and all the parts that they use up. And a lot of this stuff you have to put weeks, if not months in advance, to have them here when you're ready to do a build. Because when somebody emails me and they want, hey, can you build me a XYZ, like a 2A3 amp, if I don't have the output transformer sitting here from Haber, that's 6 to 8 weeks just waiting on those. And I'm no different than like when you guys order stuff from Edcore or wherever, I have the same lead time. So if I have 8 weeks on the transformers and then it takes me 6 or 8 weeks to build the amp, that's 6 months can go by real quick if I don't stay on top of trying to keep parts stocked up for the projects and be ordering stuff ahead. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks is I'm trying to get ahead of all these projects that I have in the pipeline so that I can get them done. Good news, the guy that's building the guy I'm building the Ultra 300B amp for, he found some crazy rare wood from Hawaii, I think or from Kona, somewhere. He showed me the prices of some of the stuff. A board of this stuff is like $2,000. So this guy's like going all out on this build. And probably going to be using Front Panel Express to do the top plate on it so we can, engrave and then white fill in lettering for all the tubes on the top of it and just do a really, really nice, piece for the top of the amp. I may have them just do the bottom cover too while I'm getting this done. And yeah, that's not cheap. It's going to be $250, $300 a plate to get those done. But that's just part of this. When you're starting to do stuff, in the nicer, higher end scale, it gets expensive quick. Just the silver wire, you can see on their website, this stuff is not cheap either. So the other thing too that I've noticed, I was going back through when I was ordering the parts for my 300B amp, and I was going through the BOM, and like I publish a BOM on my website that doesn't have prices because I know the prices are going to change. And I don't want people a year later going, well, these prices are all wrong. You need to update your BOM with all the prices. And then I'm, spending hours updating BOMs endlessly trying to keep them current prices. And then somebody took one of my BOMs and uploaded it to ChatGTP and came out, oh, ChatGTP, you said the parts are $1,000 and ChatGTP says I can get them for $810. It's like, yeah, but where? And how many different sources are they buying parts of this from? And how much extra shipping are you going to be paying having it come in from 5 different vendors? And you really want to try to keep track of all that? And I know Mouser is not the cheapest place to buy parts, but they by far have the best parts picker software of any of the electronics things. DigiKey is pretty close. As much as I like Hawk Electronics for buying Hammond iron and Hammond chassis, they've got really good prices, especially if I buy, I think $1,200, they give you a free shipping thing, and so you don't have to pay shipping for all this heavy stuff, and they got multiple discounts and all that stuff. Unless you've got the part number, they really don't have a good part selector. And so I'll give Mouser that, and that's why I buy a lot of parts from them, is it's easy to find the parts, and they really have the data sheets and all that stuff, and you're paying for the service. And they really do have good, informational service. And I will say Hawk has done a really good job. When I've had problems had a choke that was defective, they had no problem taking care of it. I showed them how the wire had just fallen out of it. They didn't even want it back. They just, credited me the choke on my account for my next purchase. Oh yeah, and the other thing I recently did is I've been onesie-twosie buying these little decorative tube rings, and if I do go into production with these chassis, they're going to be drilled for those little aluminum rings. And so I just ordered it was $1,400 worth of those rings, so I've got a bunch of them in stock. And so I may sell those too, so folks that don't want to wait for them to come from China can buy them from me. Obviously, I'm going to be selling them at retail plus shipping, so if you really are looking for the budget deal, continue ordering them direct from them. But yeah, that was another thing I had to just come up with, and that's what I've been doing, is taking the money from amp sales and just reinvesting it in buying parts and transformers and all that stuff. And so, yeah. So that's what I've been doing. A lot of behind the scenes stuff to try to get ready for this fall and especially next year to be able to get rocking and rolling. Especially once I don't know if all y'all know, I'm an elected official on the city council where I live, and this is my last year. In 3 months I'll be done, or 4 months. And so that's going to be a big time sink off my hands that I can invest in my business, the channel, all that kind of stuff without that headache over my head all the time. So, yeah, that'll be really nice to be able to just kind of move forward. And, oh, music of the week. I've been listening to Billie Holiday, and God, what a beautiful voice she has. And these are, I mean, this stuff was recorded a long time ago. A lot of it was in the 40s and the 50s, and you know, you would think, oh, that old tech, you know, the recordings are probably really scratchy and bad or whatever. They're beautiful. And I just picked up this set. Again, this is on Acoustic Sounds. This is All or Nothing with Billie Holiday. I got the mono version because most of these were designed to be listened to in mono, and I love my mono cartridge. So, got this in mono, and it's the quietest vinyl. You can't even hear when the needle drops. I mean, you can hear the needle go dunk, and then it's just dead silent. So people talking about how vinyl's cracked and pops, and I want to listen to digital because I want to listen to all that crackling and, you know, crispy cracks or whatever. That's not real when you're listening to good vinyl. This stuff was recorded on 45 RPM, so you get two discs or two albums, and it's just beautiful. So, if you like Billie Holiday, this is a special set that I think they're limited edition of, because they don't want to, wear out or try to make too many copies off of the masters, or the master pressers or whatever, and so get them while you can. And anyway, I think that's going to kind of wrap up this week's Monday Monologue. And not sure if the videos dropped. They're going to be doing a 300B tube shootout. That's going to be fun. And yeah, people seem to be really into this 300B stuff. So hey, let's go all in and do some 300B stuff. So anyway, thanks again to all you supporters of the channel, all you folks that subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the button. It doesn't cost you anything. I appreciate you folks that are members of the channel, folks that are members of Patreon. I especially appreciate you folks that give me direct donations to my website, especially, if I spend time with you trying to figure out what's wrong with one of your amplifiers or work through one of your projects or something. I really appreciate when you drop me a little donation. Comment below what you think about, this 300B iron we're coming up with. And it is going to be exciting. Like I said, once I get these projects done and I know this stuff works, I'll be listing the part numbers and how to order this stuff for yourself. And there'll be new iron on the market because Skunk keeps building stuff. And again, I think that's it. We'll see you next week for the Monday Monologue.